Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I am Laiba Siddiqi. I'll be chairing at Lumen this year.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. My name is Moosa Saeed. I'm Director Design and Merchandise, and Laiba and I today will be explaining to you what documentation in an MUN is, which includes working papers and draft resolutions. We're doing this as part of a larger series of lectures that Lumen is doing just to get people acquainted with the idea of an MUN and how to do an MUN. So if you ever feel an issue within documentation, you can refer to this video or the presentation we have or the sample resolution that we will view in this presentation so that you can be well acquainted with this and not worry about a single thing when you're going into this. Should we start, Laiba?
Yes.
So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a working paper, right? The working paper is an extremely essential part of a draft resolution. So the reason why I'm going to talk about the working paper first is because the working paper usually is the document that comes first. And if you've done even a single or even two MUNs, you will know this already. So you're already off to a good start, don't worry. So this usually comes in your second day, mid-second day, or maybe, towards the end of your second day, right? And working papers are essentially just documents that are preludes to your draft resolution. What does that mean? That means that a working paper is just a sort of devolved version of your draft resolution, which means that anything you include in the draft resolution should be in the working paper, and anything you include in the working paper should be in the draft resolution, right? So, of course, there are some differences between the two, but all in all, a working paper is just a document that is going to highlight what has been discussed in the committee so far, some stances that you might have, some principles that might have been agreed upon, and certain brief solutions that you might have, right? So the tricky thing with this is that working papers often do not have a singular format. Each chair has their own definition of a working paper. They have their own format. Some chairs will tell you to just write it on a piece of paper and give it to them. Some chairs will tell you to have like a proper document there. But a general rule of thumb that you should have is that you should model your working paper आफ्टर जो ड्राफ्ट रेजोल्यूशन का फॉर्मेट होता है. इससे ना सिर्फ आपकी जिंदगी आसान हो जाएगी, लेकिन ये भी हो जाएगा साथ साथ कि यू कैन जस्ट पेस्ट योर वर्किंग पेपर इनटू द ड्राफ्ट रेजोल्यूशन एंड it will save you tons of time in formatting. And as MUNers, we know that formatting is a time-taking job, right? So it's easier to save your time and just get it done with already, right? So just to summarize, the working paper is just the idea that has been proposed in the committee, is just what has been discussed so far, etc. So there are some things that you shouldn't do in a working paper, right? So the first is that you should not have lengthy frameworks in a working paper. Chairs often discourage that because you probably have not discussed solutions by that point. So try not to weigh towards that side because the chair will then just think that you're not really adhering to the format that they've given you. Okay? Secondly, don't talk about things that haven't been discussed in the committee. This is extremely crucial because this can often get you the allegation that you have prepared your working paper, that you have borrowed this from someone else. Be sure to avoid this at all costs. Don't talk about anything that hasn't been discussed, right? Thirdly, if you want to put in some principal stance, if you want to put in some other ideas that you think should be discussed in the future, don't mention it as a fact, right? Don't say that this is a fact, right? And assume that people will be like, hey, we need to discuss it because this is a fact, right? Please phrase it in a way that says we need to discuss etc etc. We need to discuss the principal stance of US on the Iran deal. We need to discuss the stance of Iran on the US nuclear deal, right? So if you phrase it like that, it sort of gives the chair sort of this idea that this person is edging towards this, not implying themselves that हाँ ये एक चीज है और बस ये वहाँ है, right? So just be careful of these ideas because this can really propel you from, an outstanding delegate to a best delegate, right? Or even can put you higher in terms of the eyes of the chair. So I guess that's it for the working paper. Laiba will now tell you comprehensively about a draft resolution.
Right. So a draft resolution is really, really important because it is essentially the statement or the decision that the committee has taken, and it is their means of communicating with the outside world. Because obviously, you don't have a transcript of each speech, right? So when you're trying to communicate to everyone else what you have decided as delegates, you're going to use your resolution. Now, I understand that there is a lot of confusion when it comes to draft resolutions, especially their structuring and their formatting. The key is not to overcomplicate it for yourself and try to just understand the logic, the method behind the madness. So, the first things first, a draft resolution is basically just a very, very long sentence, right? It's a sentence that spans over 2 to 3 or 4 to 5 pages. But at the end of the day, it's one single sentence. And that is why you are told that you should have only one full stop and it should come at the very end of your entire statement. Now, this statement is, or this draft is broken into three parts mainly. First, you have the header. So you can see a header over here. Um, you have to put the name of the committee over here. You can see United Nations Security Council. You have to put the date. Usually resolutions have a serial number. If you're feeling fancy, you can put that in there. You can format it to look pretty. Um, and you usually have, well, not usually, you always have a list of the signatories. Now, the signatories are every single country or every single delegate in the committee who is willing to discuss this statement or willing to discuss this draft resolution, right? They're willing to debate on it, negotiate on it, whether it should actually go out or not. We're just going to show you a sample as well. So over here, you can see a sample of a resolution. You can see the signatories over here. Acha, then we're gonna move on to the second part, which is the preambulatory clause section. You can see those over here. And then at the very end, you're gonna have operative clauses. So we're just gonna show you, right? These are your operative clauses. Now, the difference between preamps and operatives, it's really simple. Preamps are usually clauses which elaborate upon past actions which you are citing when you are making these new decisions. And the new decisions are going to go in your operatives, right? So if there are any treaties that have influenced your decision making, usually preamps will cite the UN Charter, they will cite previous resolutions that the committee has passed, because all of the new solutions that you are proposing are in light of the existing legal framework, right? So over here, you can see these preamps. They're all independent clauses. Every sentence is made up of different independent clauses. These are the different parts of that sentence. They're going to end in a comma, and they're going to start with words in the continuous tense, right? So basically ing words, emphasizing, stressing upon, maintaining, right? Those kinds of words. Then you're going to come to the operative clauses, and this is really where the bulk of your DR is. These are the actual frameworks that you have discussed and proposed in the committee, the actual solutions you want to recommend to the international community. So over here we have an independent clause, number 1, strongly condemns Iran's illicit nuclear enrichment activities in recent reports, right? It's important to note firstly that these clauses are going to be in the simple present tense, right? So you're just going to have the word and an s at the end. So condemns, decides, calls for, right? That's how you're going to phrase the actual clause. The other thing to note is that at the end of every independent clause, like in a normal sentence, you're going to separate them using a semicolon, right? So it's the same logic being applied over here. You're going to put a semicolon at the end. Over here, you can see a semicolon. Over here, you can see a semicolon, right? That's how it works. Now, you might, so this is where subclauses come into play. For example, you have an independent clause, right? And there are a bunch of things that can explain the clause further or can elaborate on the clause further. These are dependent clauses. They're only helping the main clause, right? So these are your subclause A, subclause B, subclause C. Over here you can see, right? They're going to end in commas because they're all part of a long list. Okay? So don't confuse them with the main clause. The main clause is going to end with a semicolon, as you can see over here, right? At the end of C, you can see a semicolon, right? Because this is where the entire clause ends. The different subclauses in the middle are going to be separated by a comma. It's not that hard. If you understand the logic behind it, you will get a grip on the formatting itself. Okay. So over here are some sample preambulatory phrases. वैसे, like usually you can just start your clause with any word. Just make sure the tense is correct, right? It should be in the continuous tense, all the ing words. And then for operatives, you have all the simple present tense words, right? Like encourages, endorses, expresses, like that, right? So now we're going to move on to some rules and regulations. Moosa, would you like to start off?
Sure. So there was a wonderful explanation by Laiba. And one thing that you should really note is, punctuation is really, really important because something is really particular on that. So just make sure that that's in order. But I think something that is much more important than that is some rules of procedure that occur within documentation. And so you definitely have the presentation, the discussion, and voting, and these have different motions that Laiba will tell you about. But what's really important to understand, and this is why it's really important, because these not adhering to these rules might just get you disqualified, right? You need to only do your documentation inside the committee. Unless your chair allows you to go outside and do it, you need to do it inside the committee. That is an implied rule within every MUN, right? And it's sort of unfair for you to say that the chair ne bhi bataya nahi tha, so we didn't really know, right? It's important to do this purely inside the committee, and that is the lumen sphere that we also teach. That is the idea of being ethical at MUNs, right? Not giving anyone an unfair edge. So do this in the committee. And the second thing that you really need to keep in mind is that you need to work together with other people to do this, right? So this is even this is not a rule of procedure per se, but क्योंकि chairs होते हैं unmods के अंदर, वो देख सकते हैं कि आप क्या कर रहे हो. They will usually see कि how effectively you're working with the entire committee. So if you're all to a side और आप खुद ही बैठ के लिख रहे हो, so the chair will sort of think कि यार maybe he's not being diplomatic, maybe he's not gelling with the committee, and that looks negatively upon you as a delegate, which is something we definitely do not want, right? So
Yeah,
what you should do, you
also,
should sit with other delegates and you should talk to them and you should interact with them. You should get their points, you should give them your points, you should even let them write it sometimes, right? Make sure you show that you are leading it, but also be diplomatic, don't hoard it over, right? Those are two rules that you really need to focus on if you want to not just be seen as a good delegate, but also be seen as a fair delegate and also be seen as a leader by the committee itself.
yeah, and the entire point of the committee or an MUN is to work together, right? And your drafting is the best way to show how well you can work in a team and how well you can collaborate with other people. Because in the real world, as your own country, you can't do much. You have to collaborate with other countries in order to make sure that your plan actually works. So there are three main motions that are important when it comes to documentation. So there is a motion to present the working paper or the draft resolution. There is, so when you're raising this motion, anyone can raise this motion whenever your draft is ready. Usually people might vote on it, usually it gets passed. And then you get to present it to the rest of the committee, right? So if your block has written this draft of a working paper or a resolution, you're going to share it with the rest of the committee. Then you're going to have a motion to discuss the working paper or the draft resolution. And there can be variations in this motion. It's going to be a moderated caucus. You can either you can have a mod solely dedicated to discussing one draft first, and then you can have another mod for another draft which another block is presenting, or you can just have one moderated caucus to discuss all of the drafts that have been presented simultaneously. And this is usually preferred because you can compare different drafts. You can point out what one draft is tackling, what the other draft is tackling, what the different principles are. It makes it really easy to compare and contrast, right? The third motion is the motion to vote on a draft resolution. You're not going to vote on a working paper, but you have to vote on a draft resolution in order for it to get passed. And usually there are two types of voting when it comes to a DR. Um, okay, so just one more tip. Before you're actually voting on the draft resolution, you have to have a motion to close the debate, right? So just keep that in mind. Usually, some delegate who remembers will raise it in committee. You're going to close the debate, all the discussion is over, and then you're going to raise a motion to vote on DRs, right? Usually, there might be one unanimous DR from the entire committee, there might be two or three DRs, and then everyone can vote for their favorite one. There are two types of voting procedures. The first one is voting by placard. So everyone who agrees with the resolution and wants it to pass will just raise their placard in committee. If there is a simple majority or a two-thirds majority, that also depends on the chair and the chair's discretion. Sometimes they will specify it. But if the voting, qualifies, if it fulfills the criteria, then your resolution is going to pass. The other method is by roll call voting. And what happens is that the chair is going to take roll call. They're going to call out every country's name one by one. And you have the option to say yes or no for a draft resolution, whether you agree with it, you want it to pass, or you don't want it to pass. You can also use the option of yes with rights and no with rights. To put it very, very simply, you're still voting yes, you're still voting no, but you get to make a speech to explain why you're voting no or why you're voting yes. Or you can use your speech to put in a little disclaimer. We agree with the majority of this resolution, but because of this one clause, we're voting no or yes, right? We're voting no, or in the opposite situation, you're voting yes, right? So that's how it works. In the end, we have a few tips. Moosa, do you want to start off with a tip to our viewers?
Yeah, sure. Sure. So apart from what Laiba just told you, so some tips that you need to sort of adhere to is number one, don't make any piece of documentation unnecessarily long, right? So you can have multiple frameworks, you can have, multiple solutions, that's great. But that is called being comprehensive. Being unnecessarily long is, sort of adding stuff in the operative that should be in the preambles and vice versa, right? So that sort of affects your draft solution in quite a negative way. That affects on you as a delegate in a negative way. And you should usually, take care or not do that. A way to make sure that doesn't happen is to make sure that your preambulatory clauses are extremely relevant, right? And what you can do there is that you can make sure that, as whatever Laiba has told you with the idea that preambulatory clauses need to explain what's been discussed, the basis of the committee, past resolutions that might have happened, past ideas that might take place, right? So you can put that there, and you can make them relevant. And as you saw in the sample, you can start off with just your principle. You can start off with your stance, should say, and then you can move on to the solutions that you might have. Another way to make your preambles extremely relevant is, as I told you, to add past UN resolutions and to sort of add, it could be a large sentence, but you can do this where you can sort of say, okay, so the emphasizing upon the causes for the Iran nuclear deal to be Iran's unstable government, or the lack of political infrastructure there, or ties to terrorism, etc., etc. Right? Like you could say that, and that could be just like a long sentence, but I think that is perfectly fine, usually accepted as fine. The last thing Laiba will tell you about is a very important thing
My
called
tip
karma.
is yes, karma. So, usually at the end of your study guide, you're going to have a section which says questions a resolution must answer. In short, karma. So, these are usually like a list of 3 to 4 or 4 to 5 questions that your chair gives to you. And they are meant to provide a structure or to guide your draft resolution. So, literally, even if you just come up with answers to these questions and put them in the form of a framework or a solution, or just in the form of a clause, it's going to be really, really good for you. It's going to make sure your resolution is fulfilling its purpose, it is doing what it set out to achieve. So, yeah, that is it from us. We really hope you enjoyed this video. We hope it helped out with some of the questions or confusions you might have. We're also going to be doing a second video, which will sort of explore documentation more in depth. And we really encourage you to check that out as well. So with that, Allah Hafiz. Take care.